Greetings, welcome to a favorite topic of mine, service. And we're going to talk about service tiles in this support video. Really, my infatuation with service and obsession fits into two buckets. One is the actual service tiles we're going to discuss, and the other are the servants themselves. They sort of go hand in hand. So often the servants tiles are about empowering the servants. But we're going to spend some time just reviewing what each one does and how they work. So before upstairs, downstairs, the only tile that was ever played onto the player board, just like these other types of tiles, was the butler's room. With the upstairs, downstairs expansion, we have a second example of a service tile that gets played that way. But let's for now focus on this one, because this is the granddaddy of them all. This is the tile by which we acquire new servants. And the way that this tile works is it's played on the player board, and a butler is placed as the essential servant. Now you could use, even if the butler is available, an under butler. That's one of the flexible characteristics of an under butler, but we're saving that for another video. So the butler would be placed down there, and then you could acquire two servants. So let's say two servants were acquired. Once those servants are acquired, there's no cards played. This is the only tile played where there's no cards played. And once that tile is played, it's flipped over onto the rose side. This is on the back of every tile that can be played, so that we know once we've played it, we've gone to the upgraded side. And the upgraded side on the butler's room is that you can now steal a servant from another player. You only get one, you don't get two like you get from the servants for hire. But if you need to complete an objective or you're mean, you can steal a servant from another player. That's very thematic. There was often a shortage of really good servants, in particular ladies' maids and valets. One would die or relocate somewhere, and they would try to pry away a top-notch personal servant from another estate. So that's a little bit of a thematic justification for that ability. So that's the butler's room. There's other tiles you're going to acquire in the market. I'm going to work with the tiles that come with the base game first. And the first one we're going to look at is the servants' quarters, which is my favorite improvement tile of all the tiles in the game. The servants' quarters, as would any of these tiles that have this sort of pattern on them with the white band in the middle, are put into your organizer, and they stay there for the duration of the game. It's a permanent ability, as indicated by the little wheel of arrows. So I cleared away a couple servants. It was too crowded. So the normal flow of servants from left to right, as servants get used, just as when the butler hired. So here we had the butler hired those two servants. When you hire servants, they go into expended service. And the flow as servants become available, when we rotate service as the first step in order of play, is that we move people out of the servants' quarters into available service, and we move the people who were just used the previous turn into the servants' quarters. So that means there is one turn. So if that last turn we did a hiring action, for one turn that butler's not available. The point I want to make here is that the servants in the servants' quarters aren't available for this turn. It's going to be next turn that they're going to be available, unless you have the servants' quarters. When this is in your organizer for the duration of the game, you are permitted to take one servant out of the servants' quarters and use them for a particular activity. What a tile. Favorite tile of all time. So let's take a look at the barn. And the barn has got a change in some of the language from the first edition of Obsession to the second. Not in how it works, but because we have in upstairs, downstairs a new type of servant, the language needed to be clarified. Credit to Frank Calcagno for recommending this. If we didn't change this language, it would have got into some confusion with the upstairs, downstairs servants. So when this is acquired, you've basically, as an estate owner, you've expanded your groundskeeping staff. It stays in your organizer, and for the duration of the game, anytime you play a tile that falls in this middle column, which is an estate category, these tiles with this color and this pattern, you can see estate at the bottom, and they tend to be tiles that focus on activities out of doors. Anytime one of those tiles is played onto the player board, you get an additional point of reputation due to the quality of your grounds and the groundskeeping staff's efforts. One other feature of the barn that you should note is it is the only service tile with 2 victory points. So these types of service tile with the central white banner all get played into the organizer and stay there for the duration of the game. And all of them will produce 1 victory point. But the barn produces 2, which when you think about a service courtship, that actually is a really big deal. Because a service courtship might be one with 2 or 3 or even 1 victory point for the tiles in that category. You can see that the butler's room starts out at 0. When it flips to the rose side, it picks up 1. So there's not a lot of victory points available. So the barn is actually quite a nice courtship play for a service tile. Another tile I like an awful lot is the brushing room. The brushing room is what makes your footmen be able to function as valets, the green. So this is your footman, this is your valet, and there's always a lot of footmen available and servants for hire. And if you can get a brushing room when you've got a couple of footmen, if you're family York or you've hired a couple of footmen, then you've really got your service requirements for your male guests under control. I mean, right there, well, if I had that under butler, I would have 4 servants that could actually take care of personal service for male guests. The brushing room is very powerful. Now this here, when you acquire this tile from the builder's market and you put it in your organizer, you do not get a footman. All it does is it confers a permanent ability onto any footman that you have, which is that they can function as a valet. However, there's an important distinction. They cannot function as a valet if there is a valet available. If I had this scenario, I could not use a footman. Let me find you there's an example of a card that requires a valet. I would have to use that valet, then those footmen would be available to function as a valet. If this valet was over there and my available service looked like this, then I would be able to deploy a footman. The butler's pantry is how we actually get that under butler. And the reason I made the distinction with the brushing room, that when you acquire it, you don't get a servant with that tile, is because you do with the butler's pantry. That is the only way you can acquire that under butler, is purchasing the butler's pantry from the builder's market. Comes along with an under butler who would then go into expended service and then work his way to availability. This under butler can perform any male service role except the useful man. So the useful man is a jack of all trades, sort of handyman, menial type servant. That's not the role of the under butler, but the under butler can function as a butler, can function as a valet, can function as a footman, and I'll bring a hall boy over here, can function as a hall boy. And it's an important distinction to understand that that under butler can perform those roles even if those servants are available. He has that kind of flexibility, unlike the footman and the brushing room. The final tile to talk about from the original printing of Obsession is the servants' hall. And the servants' hall was mentioned in the video that talked about rule changes. This servants' hall is a very powerful tile. It allows you to gossip about other players. And as a result, not only does the other player's reputation, which is recorded around the reputation wheel, decline, but your reputation, because when you're gossiping, you're sort of building up family Asquith here, it would increase. However, you must play a servant onto the servants' hall in the organizer when you use this, and the servant must, of course, be available. Could be any servant, but you have to play one there to do the gossiping, and then that will go ahead and get you the benefit of stealing that point of reputation. Let me make a note that when you look at the order of play, it says rotate service, and then check the round track for any special activities. Check your monuments and the servants' hall. In that second step of the order of play is when the player needs to decide which servant they're going to play to the servants' hall. If it gets to the third step of hosting an activity, Someone comes along and they forget about the second step and they go like this. When that activity hits the player board, you can no longer use the servants' hall. You forgot to gossip. Your servants did not go out and start spreading those rumors and building up the family's image. Once that servant is used in the servants' hall, when you break down at the end of the turn, that servant that gossiped goes into expended service. They, like any other servant that's been used, now must move from the left to right into availability. So now we move on to the new service tiles in upstairs, downstairs. And, you take my favorite thing and you add new, exciting favorite variations. And maybe I get excitable easy, but I am excited about these. One that I'm most excited about, I actually have to offer an apology. On this project, I had Panda tell me this was one of the most complex projects they tackled all year because of the 4 different sub-projects, if you will, 4 different SKU. And I have been so excited. One of the things that the quarantine allowed me to do was just to comb over everything 1,000 extra times. And I found something I missed. The first thing I think I've missed of note, which is the housekeeper's room has an incorrect victory point number on one side. Now everybody who's familiar with Obsession realizes that these service tiles enter into the organizer once purchased from the market, and they stay there for the duration of the game. They don't flip. They're really not two-sided tiles like these ones here. And as a result, I don't think that the error is that big of a deal because we do have it correct on one of the sides. So I've posted an errata online, and I just thought I would mention it here. But that doesn't diminish my absolute electric excitement for this particular tile, because in the development of the upstairs downstairs servants, I felt that the head housemaid was slightly underpowered. Now her special ability, which we're not going to get into extensively here, is that she screens guests, and that is a very important randomness mitigation device. So it is very significant. But outside of that particular application, the head housekeeper doesn't do much. And I had an inspiration late in the Kickstarter campaign, which was to imitate that other tile that I like so much, which is the brushing room. The brushing room takes a footman and gives them the abilities of the valet. The housekeeper's room takes the head housemaid and gives her the abilities of both the housekeeper and the lady's maid. Not the cook, which is the other female domestic. Hey, Mrs. Puggins is unique. She can't go in there and turn out larded oysters like Mrs. Puggins. But that gives a wonderful flexibility because there is a real handicap and a shortage of a housekeeper in a game. Everybody who's played knows that. And this now gives an avenue in which to manage that. So I love the tile a ton. It enters the organizer and it confers that ability. It doesn't get you a head housemaid. For any head housemaid that you have or you acquire, from that point on for the duration of the game, they will be able to function like a housekeeper or a lady's maid, whether or not those are available. So that head housemaid can jump in the trenches and free up the housekeeper to do something else, or a lady's maid to do something else. Very flexible, very wonderful tile. I'm equally excited about this, and I'll tell you what, I think experienced players are going to identify this tile as one of the real game changers, because this allows you to break the rule. What rule does it allow you to break? Do you see where each one of these tiles, and those familiar with Obsession know that you have to provide that exact number of the designated gentry type. So here's just 2 generic gentry. Here's 2 ladies. So basically this allows you to increase or decrease the count of that type of guest. So you could go to 3 gentry or 1 gentry. Wow, that's a big deal. Sometimes you've only got 1 card left. You really don't want to pass. You want to do something. That 1 gentry's got a little bit of a favor. Now you can play them with the carriage house. Here, you could go 3 ladies or 1 lady. Do you notice how we have to respect the type of gentry that are involved? There are improvement tiles that have gentlemen, so it increase or decrease gentlemen. There are improvement tiles that have a gentleman and a lady. You're permitted to have fun with that sort of rendezvous, whatever was happening. That was supposed to be a romantic rendezvous. 3's a crowd. You can go ahead and add to that activity any way you like. You cannot use the carriage house for family when they're the designated participants in an activity. Why? What's the logic, thematic logic of a carriage house? You're going to extend yourself a little more than normal, not just put out an invitation, but you're going to actually, I better put somebody up there. You're going to actually take a footman, you're going to send the carriage with the driver, but the footman, rides along back. The term footman comes from maybe a couple of centuries before the period of this game where footmen used to run behind the carriage. Now they're going to be in back. They'll be standing in the back of the carriage, on the back of the carriage. They'll manage the luggage. They will help the ladies down and help them over mud puddles and do all the necessaries when they get sent by the Asquith to go pick somebody up, which would be to increase the count, or to take someone home who maybe is under the weather to decrease the count. A wonderfully flexible tile. Now, here's a cool thing. The hall boy, who is an apprentice footman, that's what a hall boy is, he can cut his teeth and go in place of the footman, whether or not the footman's available to go ahead and perform that function. So can also the under butler. If he's got to jump in and go ahead and make sure a guest is taken care of, he can do that. So to use that carriage house, an appropriate servant, in which case it would be an under butler, a hall boy, or a footman, can be placed on the carriage house, and then they'll be rotated through service conventionally. Great tile. Don't forget to use it when you got it in your organizer. The final tile is a single tile. So both the housekeeper's room and carriage house, there's 2 copies of that tile. It's going to show up a little bit more. This is a solo tile. You see this in the marketplace. You want to get your antenna up. What does the renovated kitchen allow you to do? Well, this, you can see, does not have that central white banner. It comes from the builder's market, and it goes into your organizer. It has 0 victory points on the front side. And when it's flipped, it'll generate 1 victory point and a permanent ability, which I will get to. So this is a service tile which is played one time. And it is for the renovated kitchen, is for the grand gourmet tasting to sort of christen the renovated kitchen. So the Asquiths acquire this tile from the market. They've invested, because you can see it's expensive. They've invested in renovating their kitchen. And now, you know what happens? They're able to break down those typical snobbish restraints of the aristocracy to come to a humble estate that hasn't quite emerged from those financial tough times. You can invite any guests to attend. That gets played onto the player board, and there is nothing to stop this humble family, except service, from inviting guests of this caliber with these kinds of favors early in the game. Now, some of you are looking at this and saying, "Whoa, developer dude, you're breaking the game." Well, let me explain that there are some self-regulating mechanisms here. Prestige guests are somewhat difficult to get early. Everybody gets one, and maybe you're going to land one of these guests. But by the time you've got 2 elite prestige guests, in my experience, you're typically into season 2. That takes it from being sort of a game breaker in the second round maybe, or the third round, to being something that's an excellent, it's a superb turn. Or, there's nothing to stop someone from playing with a family member. It's, what it is? It happens to be a great use now of a high-level prestige guest that you would normally be a little bit bummed about if you drew them with that first season play with the main gazebo. If you have that renovated kitchen, which again is rare, it's expensive. If you have that renovated kitchen, you can put together a great event. Now, let me make a point. This is a unique tile because this actually requires the cook to be played onto this tile for that grand opening of that renovated kitchen. She'll get rotated. After this is played, sorry, bumping things, it now goes into the organizer, and like any other service tile, it confers a permanent ability. And what this does, it allows you to invite an extra guest to any activity, and that can include family. Just the magnetism of Mrs. Puggin's larded oysters allows you to add guests for the remainder of the game. Great tile. People are going to fight over that one.